Thousands of children are taking part in an online activity and survey set to explore the links between nutrition, exercise and sleep, and children's cognitive functions. There is a growing body of scientific research examining the links between lifestyle and learning. We're going to look at the key findings, as well as showing how a better understanding of brain function is helping teachers in the classroom.
You can already see where there is understanding in neuroscience blossoming that is making contact, or could make contact now, with what we are doing in the classroom. There is enough knowledge within neuroscience to enhance and develop today's teaching. I would say yes. But it can't be done by taking something off the shelf that the neuroscientists have discovered. There has to be a transfer, if you like. There has to be some system.
Until very recently, there's been, if you like, two separate worlds, the worlds of the cognitive scientist and the world of education. And the one hasn't really spoken much to the other, but increasingly now, over the last year or two, I think people are realizing there's a lot of cross-fertilization and a lot of benefit that can be gained from both sides comparing notes.
Ready to Learn, the experiment, consists of online activities and questions testing the hypothesis that 3 key factors affect children's readiness to learn: nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Research tells us that the lack of sleep fundamentally affects brain function. Professor Gregory Storrs from the University of Oxford researches the impact of the lack of sleep on school children.
Well, there are all sorts of theories as to why we need sleep, none of them perfectly satisfactory, but from the practical point of view, what's clear that is if you don't sleep well, then you're affected quite badly, or can be, during the day. Basically, sleep has a restorative function. Without sleep, all sorts of things can go wrong. I mean, to an extreme in animal experiments, it's been demonstrated that if, say, rats are kept awake the whole time for a fortnight or so, well, they don't survive. Adolescence is a particularly troublesome time because there's a change in what's called the body clock. Young people of that age require more sleep than perhaps they're used to, so it's a particularly vulnerable time. So educators do need to have more emphasis placed on this topic in their basic training. They'll see the effects of poor sleep in the classroom for sure, because there's a very high proportion of young people who don't sleep well and therefore are affected in terms of their behaviour at school and their performance there. Well, we've begun to talk to schools simply to provide a basic understanding, hopefully, of the importance of sleep, the ways in which poor sleep can be recognised, and give reassurance that help can be provided so that young people can feel much better during the day and perform better at school.
The Ready to Learn experiment will ask key questions about children's sleep, as well as about their diet and exercise patterns. Scientific research is revealing the importance of nutrition and exercise on children's performance in school. Chinham Park Primary in Basingstoke has taken part in a pilot project called Food for the Brain. The 8-month scientific study involved changes in diet and exercise, as well as giving some of the children food supplements.
Steve, are you having tablets or not?
The children's behaviour and academic performance was monitored throughout.
1, 2, 3, back. Watch Georgia, everybody on this side, she's doing it well. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, good.
What was exciting about the Food for the Brain project for me was it wasn't just about healthy eating and health and exercise. It was a whole package, a package that involved working with the children and their families. Now that also incorporated carrying out some initial tests to try and create a baseline for the children, looking at their personal happiness, looking at their behaviour, also making some measures of their learning, as we did as teachers, And then 6 months down the line, carrying out those tests again, and then finally at the end of the project, doing a final analysis of those results. And it was quite startling how many children had in fact made progress in a number of areas.
Parents and staff at Chinham have been working with nutritionist Kerry Torrens from the Food for the Brain project. Her aim is to promote awareness of the link between learning, behaviour and nutrition.
There is a significant link between nutrition and how we think, how we behave. For example, our brains are made up of 60% fat, and that's not just any old fat, it's not saturated fat, it's essential fat. And those fats can only be achieved by eating them in the diet. So oily fish, nuts and seeds are absolutely essential for the composition of our brain. And then the brain also uses energy, and it uses 30% of our total energy consumption. So it's really important that we provide sustained energy.
Scientific research into the effects of diet on the brain is also taking place in a number of schools in Swansea. A team from the University of Swansea Psychology Department have been carrying out tests on children's performance and seeing what the relationship is to their diet.
I mean, there's enormous interest in giving the optimal conditions for a child's learning experience. The child's brain is, relative to the rest of the body, is larger than in the adult. It's about 10% of body weight in the child, it's about 2% in the adult. In addition, the brain is more active in the child per amount of tissue. So if you take 10 grams of tissue in the child, it'll use twice as much glucose as 10 grams of tissue if it had come from the adult. So, you know, it is a very hungry organ.
Professor Benton's research involved assessing the children's performance in relation to 3 different types of breakfast.
What we did was to design 3 meals that varied in the rate at which it would release energy. They all had the same energy levels. The calories were the kilojoules were the same, but in some they would be released more slowly. And the hypothesis was that the more slowly released energy would have beneficial effects late in the morning.
The children were each given a series of tests after they had been given 3 very different types of breakfasts, varying in range from fast, medium, and slow glucose release foods.
Late in the morning, we gave them a series of tests. A test of memory, the ability to sustain attention, and whether they reacted in a frustrated way when facing a difficult task. We studied the children for a month, and each day they had one of the 3 breakfasts. So, in fact, the information we report comes from children who have had each of the breakfasts at least 3 occasions.
Interestingly, the continental breakfast of ham and cheese and multigrain bread, which is a slow release of glucose, came out on top.
If you have a meal that released the energies slowly, that you had better memory, your increased ability to sustain attention, and you're less likely to become frustrated when faced with a difficult situation. Of course, behaviour in school, as elsewhere, depends on a very wide range of different factors, of which diet is one. So I'd like to see it added to the list.
Back at Chinham, the Food for the Brain study also looked at the effects of food supplements on children's behaviour and academic progress.
Part of the Food for the Brain project also incorporated giving children additional vitamin and fish oil supplements. Now, as you know, these are very expensive items to buy off the shelf, and part of the Food for the Brain project was that this was all provided for free for the children.
There have been some really interesting studies in the application of supplements and improving academic performance, and most of them have shown some change in IQ levels. Now, it's interesting to see that both a multivitamin and mineral and an omega-3 fat can really help support a child's learning ability. For example, omega-3s, EPA and DHA are the most active forms of omega-3. EPA can be really beneficial in terms of hyperactivity, so it can improve concentration levels. And DHA is fundamental for the development of the brain. So there's some really interesting research available to support the use of supplements. We saw here at Chinham that even if we were struggling with dietary changes, the fact that the supplements were a consistent part of the children's day really helped show improvement quite rapidly in the study.
Academic achievement has improved. We've seen significant improvement, particularly in English. That has been our key focus within the school, improving reading and writing. And we have seen the last couple of years 14% increase in results.
Whilst the research into the benefits of food supplements shows promise, the science is still at the early stages. There is not yet clear evidence to confirm the impact of supplements on brain function. At Chinham, they were part of a whole school drive to raise academic attainment.
We did see changes in academic performance, and it is something that we want to investigate further. Here at Chinham, we looked at diet, supplements and physical activity, so we incorporated all three of those angles.
The final aspect of the Food for the Brain project included a daily 15-minute progressive program of speed, agility and quickness exercises.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Well, I think that if we are improving children's hand-eye coordination, then that has a positive impact on handwriting and presentation skills. And we're definitely beginning to see an impact in that aspect of their work. Apart from the fact that children are more settled and able to go into lessons after lunchtime because they've actually had a 10-15-minute structured speed, agility, quickness session.
The latest scientific research into the effects of exercise and fitness on children's learning ability is revealing a much stronger relationship than was previously assumed. Professor Stuart Biddle at Loughborough University researches the impact of physical exercise on school-aged children, looking at motivational and emotional benefits, as well as improvements in brain function.
All right, guys, keep going. There is a literature that's looked at the relationship between exercise, if you like, possibly physical fitness as well, although exercise and physical fitness are not perfectly related, and how the brain functions. We usually refer to that as cognitive functioning or brain functioning. And the literature with children suggests that if children are fitter or are more active, they perhaps do have a benefit in enhanced memory. So the brain may actually be in better shape, if you like, to do these tasks, or they feel better about themselves, they're more relaxed and more confident to operate in a classroom environment. The parts of the brain that are involved in memory or in terms of alertness might be due to blood flow in the brain, are enhanced after exercise and in fitter people. And therefore that might be an explanation as to why these children could do better in the classroom.
We're now learning some very exciting results from Rusty Gage's lab in the States, showing something that no one would have thought possible, and that is that physical exercise can actually lead to the growth or development of new brain cells, so-called neurogenesis. It was first commented on by an observation, again an educationist noticed that, I think it was the high school hockey team, was suddenly getting better grades. We do know that cells prosper much more with exercise, they function better. So it really is very good. It's not just mental exercise, which we're familiar with as being good for the brain, but physical exercise now is being shown directly to have an impact, not just on the health of existing neurons, but on the growth of new ones.
As we've seen, the evidence gathered in schools about the effects of exercise, sleep and nutrition on children's learning is already informing education. But what is neuroscience telling educators about how the brain actually processes information? As our understanding increases of how children's brains develop, scientists are coming to the view that a major influence on the actual biology of a child's brain is their teacher.
What is the task of educators in terms of the brain? Well, some people have gone as far as saying educators are actually there to nurture the brain. There is no other profession where the daily task is to actually change the connectivity and structure of the brain.
One of the key ideas that's come out of neuroscience and psychology the last of the last 10 years has been an understanding of the flexibility, of the plasticity of the brain, and particularly of that flexibility and that plasticity of the brain in response to experience.
So everything that happens in the classroom is literally leaving its mark on the brain. It's literally actually shaping those connections and the shifting strengths and balances and weaknesses between each connection within each brain.
And therefore, teachers, you could argue, are the only professionals that have to change brain connectivity on a daily basis.
The latest scientific research into brain function is helping to reveal information that is increasingly useful to educators.
We can understand something about the function of the brain and link it to our learning and our behaviour by using some of the latest techniques that we have now, such as fMRI brain imaging. These allow us to actually look at blood flow in the brain in response to different types of tasks that we happen to be carrying out. So you can place somebody in a brain scanner, ask them to perform a certain task, and you can actually see where in the brain blood flow is increasing. And we believe that that blood flow is related to increased cognition in that particular area of the brain. When you look at the brain, the first thing that's very obvious is that it's made up of two halves, two hemispheres, the left and the right. But those are connected by something called the corpus callosum. And that's a massive set of fibres that connects the processes and networks in the left part of the brain with those in the right and vice versa. But each hemisphere can then be broken down further into 4 lobes. You have the frontal lobe, which is of great interest to educators because that's where much of our higher level processing and reasoning takes place. You have the temporal lobes on the side, very much associated with memory and also with auditory processing. You have the occipital lobe right at the back of the brain, very much associated with visual processing. And then between the occipital and the frontal lobes you have the parietal lobes, and they are very much to do with integrating information and also associated with some types of mathematical reasoning.
As your brain grows after birth, although you're born with pretty much all the brain cells you'll have, it is the growth of the connections that distinguishes the human brain even compared to a chimp after birth. And because this happens postnatally, it means even if you're a clone, an identical twin, you will have a unique pattern of connections that are in turn driven and shaped by your experiences, by the signals coming in.
We know that you get to a certain age, somewhere between probably 4 and 7, that actually the brain has more connections than it will ever have in the rest of its life. And after that, what you find is that some of those connections, the connections that you use start getting stronger, but some of the connections that you don't use start getting pruned back. That process continues right on into adolescence, actually.
Despite the fact that teachers have this very enthusiastic interest in the brain, and despite the fact that you might think that the brain is absolutely central to what education is about, if you were training as a teacher via a PGC, for example, you would be extremely lucky to come in contact with anything that might be termed a neuroscience, and indeed psychology, I have to say as well, which is a very important part of the bridge between neuroscience and education. So at the moment, no, there is a terrible sort of sparsity of understanding, I'd say, in terms of the brain amongst educators.
I do think in the past there's been a case of neuroscientists standing up and saying, we're the experts, we know about learning, this is what you should do, and there's not always been a dialogue. So, well, what can teachers get out of this, if anything, from engaging with some of these ideas? We've just run a pilot project with a group of Gloucestershire advanced skills teachers, just exploring this issue, exploring how some of these ideas, some of these scientific perspectives in learning can help them and support their experiential expertise of teaching.
The Institute for the Future of the Mind is working with teachers to transfer the latest knowledge of the workings of the brain directly into classroom practice.
What I've learned from working with the neuroscientists from the Institute for the Future of the Mind, particularly about the processes that are happening in the brain that obviously I wasn't aware of, and this building of connectivity, and the more extensive the connectivity in the brain, the more developed the brain will be. I know, but the protons and neutrons need to go in the middle, in the dish. The last thing you want to do is to actually stimulate that child's learning with just visual, because you are not allowing the auditory and the kinesthetic parts of their brain to actually develop. So you're actually doing them a disservice by just feeding their preferred learning style.
And by all means, talk to each other while you're doing this if you can't quite remember how.
And that was quite powerful at that point in the seminar, because we're all happy to develop lessons and look for children's preferred learning styles, what they're comfortable with. But this put another dimension onto bringing those 3 learning styles, or how important it is to make children use all 3 learning styles.
Conducting the Ready to Learn survey with thousands of school children should provide a unique opportunity to test the hypothesis that a child's physiological state directly affects their readiness to learn. Professor Rory Collins is the principal investigator of UK Biobank, looking at the effects of genetic and environmental factors on human health and disease. He is a world authority on mass studies.
There are an awful lot of things we don't know, and studying big enough populations and seeing whether there are predictors of all sorts of things, not just disease, but predictors of how well you do at school, how well you do at work, is a really important and valuable thing to do. A big study of this sort that studies the association between diet, which we know is important for a whole range of things, not just disease, physical activity and other measures of our exposure, and see whether that affects our ability to learn, I think is very interesting.
Ready to Learn, the experiment, consists of a series of online activities and questionnaires designed by a team of child psychologists and interactive designers.
The experiment takes a number of parts, but as far as the child's concerned, it's one single experience. What we've done is we have a number of questions that describe the child's behaviour prior to the test. So whether they've slept well, whether they've had anything to eat for breakfast, how they've got to school. But we sequence those questions between a number of different activities, almost game-like activities, where we test recall and we test response time and we test their ability to plan. All of the activities are assessing the child's ability within executive functions, their ability to make conscious decisions.
We know that your executive function abilities, your ability to control your cognition, is a better indicator of school readiness in preschool kids than either IQ, entry-ready maths level or entry-level reading level. So I think that the idea of focusing, the potential to focus on developing these skills, it could be really, really fruitful.
The experiment aims to provide the largest data set ever recorded about children's readiness to learn, hopefully making a significant contribution to scientific research in this area. This collaboration between scientists and educators will become increasingly important as we learn more about children's brain development.
There's no way in which education can afford to be brain blind, which is what it appears to be at the moment, I have to say, because there are already issues very much to do with neuroscience, very much to do with the brain in the classroom.
The latest research is already beginning to affect teaching and pastoral practices in our schools, potentially helping to raise academic attainment and children's well-being. Ready to Learn, the experiment aims to take this one step further.
We have to say that we are very ambitious with the big experiment, because we are taking, in a way, what we are doing is we are collecting all the different studies that have been done previously in a way, and we are trying to do all of them at the same time. It has never been done at that scale, because we are talking about thousands of children, and also we are talking about children from the age of 6 to the age of 16. There have been many research carried out with children, but fewer with adolescents. This is something new as well in the big experiment. We will have data about how adolescents do.
The experiment's open to all schools within the UK. Anyone can take part. It doesn't require any particular equipment. Anyone with a computer and an internet connection can take the test. Schools need to pre-register so that they can actually have their information collected as part of the research project, but it's open to everyone. Every child that takes part is completely anonymous. We never know who they are, and although we capture all of their performance data through the activities and their data collection about their behaviour prior to school, we can never identify that information with a child. In total, the whole experiment shouldn't last more than about 10 minutes. Depending on the child's ability, they may see more or less of the particular activities, but about 10 minutes, so it shouldn't be too intrusive into a lesson.
The data gathered by the experiment may help answer questions from both the worlds of science and education.
I think that's indicative of the future of this field in general, which is about collaborative research. So that research that contains input from science, but also input from the educationalists and multidisciplinary teams doing research that has the outcomes that are going to have direct application to the classroom.
I'm sure there are lots more things on the neuroscience frontier, and I'm sure many neuroscientists know and feel that there is a highly prized place for neuroscience developments and ideas to be extended to teachers.
What do we actually want to see happening in terms of the classroom? How can people be informed? I think certainly if teachers wish to, that they should be able to have courses in applied neuroscience, not to become medical students, but rather to know what is important that will affect what they are doing and how they might be changing things.
We can't afford not to think about the brain as educators anymore.